Good morning, and plenty of money standing right behind me. It must be Trump's money, because it isn't mine.
We'll definitely get on that one today. Firstly, in response to Democrats voting Attorney General William Barr in contempt of Congress, President Trump has placed the Mueller report under executive privilege. Ed, what does this mean?
It means nothing, because the Congress does have the right to place the Mueller report on the record like anything else. The president is not the king. He cannot suppress anything. Now, there is a point he could have used, that there are people who are under indictment and those indictments are still sealed. That can be kept from the record. But other than that, he hasn't got a leg to stand on.
House Judiciary Committee Chairman Gerald Nadler had to say Attorney General Barr, having proved himself to be the personal attorney to President Trump rather than the Attorney General of the United States. Nothing new there, Ed. That's what we've been saying.
Well, that's what we've been saying. The Attorney General actually has played it both ways. Sometimes he appears to be the Attorney General of the United States, and other times the Attorney General for the President. He's actually playing it both ways. It's hard to tell where he is on all these issues, unfortunately. I think what he is trying to do is to make sure he stays within the guidelines of his responsibilities. But beyond that, he's the president's man.
And just before we get off this, because we do badly want to get off this, but the Senate Intelligence Committee is also subpoenaed Donald Trump Jr. to come before them in relation to his earlier testimony on the Russia investigation. Bad news for Trump Jr.
Probably because he lied before. And this way, if they catch him in the lie, he can go to jail. And that's really the serious thing. Whether the president's son is found in contempt of Congress and he has to face some jail time, as others have. Now, it hasn't been long. Papadopoulos, he got 3 weeks or 5 weeks or whatever it is. But a felony on your record is not good for your future employment or anything else.
Moving on, the Sandra Bland video emerged this week. Now, the Sandra Bland case, a young black woman arrested after a routine traffic stop, later found dead from apparent suicide in her cell, was picked up in 2015 by Black Lives Matter. The trooper who arrested her, was later charged with perjury after lying about the encounter, and this new video, shot by Sandra herself, reigniting debate this weekend.
Well, again, there's nothing new there. Black Lives Matter is really on because Black Lives Matter. Had this happened to a white person, there had been investigations and so on. Just last week, an Australian was killed by a black cop, and there's a $21 million judgment. So we have a situation here where black lives are not treated in the same way as everyone else's, and that has to be dealt with. It really does. Black lives do matter, and this young woman is not unusual. As a matter of fact, she is the usual, driving while black.
I mean, we did touch on that case last week, the Justine Demond case. Two very different cops, very different sets of issues at play, but again, reiterating that idea that American police are walking into these encounters like they're walking into a war zone, and black Americans are the ones bearing the most brunt of that.
That's true. Black Americans assumed to be armed and dangerous. A white American is just another person.
And just on this as well, last week we had a shooting in North Carolina, which we didn't even have time to talk about. This week, a shooting in Denver, and these things, unfortunately, I mean, certainly not for the victims, but for the media, for America at large, barely registering at this point.
Well, they are registering in a way you might be thinking about. They're registering for the Democrats for the next election. Every one of these creates a marker in that city, that jurisdiction, or among those people who say we have to get rid of the guns. And guns are going to be a big deal in this election.
International news, and America is sending a message to Iran by putting aircraft carriers in the region, while Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of State, cancelled a visit to Germany to fly into Baghdad amidst tensions. What's going on?
Well, this is all show. When Trump's in trouble, he finds to find a show. And this is the most recent show. American carriers and so forth in the war zone, Americans acting tough. This is all show. And Pompeo's visit is more show. So I think we're seeing Showtime USA. The president has no policies, no programs, no directions. So more show. That's what we're going to get for a long time to come.
We're going to wag the dog right into 2020.
Yeah, well, look, if you look at all these subpoenas, all these denials of tax records, which we'll get into, all this stuff is because the president has no agenda. And he needs to be on the air doing something that looks offensive, but in fact, he's on the defensive. So again, more show. The president needs a show.
Meanwhile, on trade with China, Trump threatening to double tariffs on $200 billion worth of Chinese goods if a deal can't be met. He and China's top trade negotiator meeting this week, I believe. What's your take, Ed?
Well, who pays these tariffs? American businesses and American consumers. Will Americans stop buying Chinese goods? Hardly, because they're the only goods on the market. As a matter of fact, many times now, the Chinese goods are better than the American goods. So Americans are going to continue to buy them. We have some of the largest suppliers of sports equipment and the like providing these goods that are made in China. Computers are made in China. So slapping these tariffs on are really slapping tariffs on American citizens. Clearly, China doesn't like it because they're trying to really build their internal economy. But they have a big market internally. They don't just have the American market. The president, again, Showtime USA. He'll have to make a deal.
Circling back to Trump's personal issues, such as it were, while House Democrats are still trying to get their hands on his tax returns, the New York Times coming out with a sensational report this week that claims Trump saw $1.17 billion worth in losses between 1985 and 1994. I'd say no real surprises in this. It was quite well known this is the kind of businessman Trump was, but still some good old-fashioned investigative journalism from the Times. What do we think?
Well, the first thing I think is that the government is opening up to the American people below the president. The people who let those documents leak were not appointed by Trump. They weren't appointed by Obama, but they're public servants, and they're making sure the government continues to run and the truth gets out, even out of the White House. Remember that op-ed piece in the New York Times. We are going to continue to protect the American citizens, and that's continuing to happen. So it doesn't matter whether Nadler and those guys get their hands on these documents, they're coming out.
Trump claimed the losses for tax purposes, well, they were losses for tax purposes only, while also saying the Times report was a highly inaccurate fake news hit job, which is a bit contradictory. But really, what's more troubling here, that Trump is a terrible businessman, or that you've got a president who has always held himself above paying taxes like us common folk?
Do billionaires pay taxes? This is really news to me. Boy, if he had paid taxes, people would say, you're the worst businessman in the world. You're a billionaire and you're paying taxes. No. What the president's trying to do is get both sides of this. He's saying these tax returns aren't important. If they're not important and they're not accurate, show us the real ones. Why not at this time?
And on this interesting article in The Hill this week, I just wanted your thoughts on, suggested that Republicans, through, I suppose, their total inaction and comments in the media, suggested that Republicans are trying to goad Democrats into trying to impeach Trump. You've been perfectly open about the fact that you see impeachment as a loser for the Dems. Would Republicans be seeing it as their political salvation, as the article put it?
This is the way to get their group on side and galvanize them and get some other Republicans who don't support the president but are against the impeachment on side. So it's a good strategy. It will not work. It is so transparent, the Democrats see it. Now, here's the impeachment strategy. Get his tax returns. Get all the business you can on his womanizing. get everything you can on his failed policies. And you're impeaching him by policy, not by throwing him out of office and getting a good candidate to run against him.
And just feeding into this slightly, looking at the 2020 race this week, Elizabeth Warren has been one of the lead voices talking about impeachment. Beto O'Rourke seems to be falling behind slightly in terms of, well, if we're just talking about a VP slot right now for the leading contender Joe Biden, Beto O'Rourke seems to be falling behind. Kamala Harris, a name you mentioned, of course, again last week, she's been lacking in a lot of mainstream attention, but certainly seems to be impressing.
Yes, she's impressing, but I think she's more on the presidential side, going head to head. I can't imagine Biden selecting a person who views themselves as president, but Amy Klobuchar from Michigan, I think she's playing for the vice presidency. She's from the right state. She's a middle of the grounder in many respects, but she's on the left when it comes to social policy. So she's come up from nowhere. I didn't have her on my radar until recently. And I think she has a good chance because she's Midwest, not far west. The far west is almost entirely Democratic. You really don't need them. Like a Catholic doesn't need to be running for Catholics. So why run in the West? Get that Midwest. Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Ohio decide the elections.
And finally, in spite of any repentance, former Trump fixer Michael Cohen started his sentence behind bars earlier this week. Do you have any thoughts to keep him warm on those cold, lonely prison nights, Ed?
Well, I have a new book out. It's called The Rise and Fall of a President, and I want him to pre-read it before I send it to my publisher. He will be the ideal person for this book. It's fiction, but I think if I spell his name right, everything else is true.
Fantastic. Ed, mate, thank you very much.
Thank you, mate. More on the money. Follow the money. That's where it all is. Take care.
Absolutely.